welcome to this GCSE Religious Studies Masterclass for the Edexcel specification. In particular, as the textbook author for the Catholic Christianity specification, I will be focusing on questions from that area of the syllabus, but this may well be useful for anyone who's doing GCSE Spec A or even Spec B. As I said, I was the primary author of the Catholic Christianity with Islam and Judaism textbook that many students are currently using in their classrooms. And in February 2018, we also published the accompanying revision guide that goes with that, of which I wrote the majority of that book, including a lot of the exam guidance and help. So hopefully I'll be able to give you a bit of an insight into how to best perform with your exam questions. Okay, we will start with part A questions. These will nearly always begin outline. The exam board suggests that you only have 3 minutes to answer them, and I would suggest you always write a sentence for each point, one on each line, kind of in a bullet point format. It's really important you don't write too much. Actually, it'd be great if you could do this in just 2 minutes rather than 3. There's an example that I've shared with you there about why you can't just give a list. The question from the Judaism paper there outlined 3 characteristics of the Almighty. If you simply list one judge and lawgiver, you will just get 1 mark. If you simply write the Almighty is one, the Almighty is a judge, and the Almighty is a lawmaker, you will get the full 3 marks for it. It is possible to see some questions that will begin state in the part A, but these will only come up in connection to the primary religions in the UK. I'm sure many of you will have seen that question on the sample assessment paper, and indeed may well have done it in a mock or preparation for a GCSE. It's very unlikely you see one. If you do, you can just write 3 words for that. But again, if you're in that habit of writing 3 sentences, 1 on each line, that will also be entirely appropriate and get you the full marks. The part A's are quite straightforward as long as you remember to write in 3 sentences. As I said, I would always suggest on 3 different lines. Part B questions. The majority of Part B questions will begin explain, and the exam board have suggested that these should take you 4 minutes, and you really need to have 2 clear, developed, signposted paragraphs. Techniques that maybe have taught to you in English or history could be useful. The PEE method, point, example, explain, could be very useful for you. Just to help you understand this a little bit better, we've got an example on the board there. Explain 2 reasons why Christians believe that Jesus is the Son of God. Firstly is our signposting. Makes it really clear this is our first point. It is shown in the baptism of Jesus by John. That's 1 mark. That's your simple point. A voice from heaven says that Jesus is the Son of God. That develops it and gets the 2nd mark. I always recommend starting a new line, even leaving a line for your 2nd bullet point, depending on space. Beginning it with secondly, again, to make it very clear that this is your 2nd reason. It is a central teaching of the Creed. 1 mark. Catholics declare, I believe in one Lord Jesus Christ, the only begotten Son, which is also a source of wisdom and authority, but here it is being used as a development. There is a possibility of some of these questions beginning describe, and if they do, a slightly different structure is going to be needed. There's only a few areas where these could come up: eschatology and life after death, and worship and prayer. And this way you'll be asked to compare Catholic Christianity with either Judaism or Islam, whichever religion you are studying. I would always suggest those questions are structured quite differently. In your first paragraph, you would have something from Christianity and something from Judaism or Islam that contrasts it. And again, in your 2nd paragraph, something from Christianity and then something from Judaism or Islam that contrasts it. One of the things that's really quite important is your development is answering the question. One of the things the exam board found when they were looking at some students' answers is that they were developing their answers with correct factual information, but it wasn't linked to the question. So what I've done is adapted that answer that we had that was worth full marks, and show you now how not to do it. So in that first paragraph, firstly, it's shown in the baptism of Jesus by John. That still gets us 1 mark. This was an event that took place in the River Jordan and was followed by Jesus' time in the wilderness. That's absolutely correct, but it is not helping us to answer the question. It's not showing your understanding of Jesus as the Son of God. It's showing some factual information about Jesus' life. Secondly, is a central teaching of the Creed. These are statements of belief that are recited at Mass. Again, here your development is showing understanding of the Creed, but not directly answering the question. So it's really important that you make sure that your development, as well as your point, is focused in on the question. Okay, part C questions. These will begin explain. They will always begin explain. And again, the exam board have suggested these should only take you 4 minutes. The structure is quite similar with 2 clear developed signposted paragraphs. Again, point, example, explain might well be useful. The key thing here is you must add an additional point, which is a source of wisdom and authority. This has got to be on top of your development. So you can see from the example here, we make our point. Firstly, some Jews want Israel to be the Jewish homeland today. That's our point. That gets us 1 mark. And as a result, they may try to move back there, believing it is the promised land. That's our development, which again is making sure we answer the question. We've then added, and you can see I've made it really clear in the purple, a clear source of wisdom and authority. It says that God would make of Abraham a great nation. With the source of wisdom and authority, I always suggest that it's good to be as accurate as you can. You can paraphrase. Just try to be as precise and specific as you can. If you can remember the full reference, that's brilliant. That's really excellent. As it's got here, Genesis 12, 1-4. If you couldn't remember that, would you be able to remember it's Genesis? That again is really helpful. At the very least, maybe the Old Testament. But as always, with your source of wisdom and authority, try to be as precise as you can. On to the part D questions. These are the ones that cause people the most stress and the most difficulty. What I would say is it's really important to remember that there are various different ways to get full marks. So your teacher may well have given you some kind of structure that's different to this. There are lots of different ways of doing it. The questions will always be a statement that you are asked to evaluate. And the exam board suggests you should be spending around 15 minutes on these. It's really important you check the bullet points to see what's included. Is it asking you for Catholic teaching? Is it asking you for different Christian views? Is it asking you for non-religious or secular ethical theories? What is it asking you for? Because you really need to organise your thoughts before starting to write. I always recommend students spend even a minute or so just with a very brief outline or plan to organize their thoughts. You need to work out which side is for and which side is against. It's really important that you do include some accurate religious teaching in this answer. So for those of you doing the Catholic paper, you need to know what the Catholic view is and make sure you put that the right way around. Sources of wisdom and authority are not compulsory in this, but I think they're really useful. I think they're really helpful to back up what the religious teaching is. It is crucial to, if you want to get the highest marks in this, to link your ideas together, and also ask yourself the questions: what are the strongest, the most convincing arguments in this? And again, it must have a conclusion. Otherwise, you're only going to be getting 6 out of 12 marks for this. There is a real demand of your literacy here. And I always think that it's very useful to include phrases such as however, therefore, on the other hand, in contrast, this is supported by, this is made clear by, because they're the kind of things that will build the chains of reasoning which are necessary for the highest levels. If you want the simplest approach, the most straightforward approach, which can still get you full marks, I think it's very effective to have 2 or 3 developed points for the argument, 2 or 3 developed points against the argument, followed by a conclusion that must be justified. You don't have to bring in a new point of information here, but perhaps pick out from those 5 or 6 points that you've made beforehand, which is the most convincing. In some of these questions, you will be assessed on your spelling, punctuation, and grammar. They're the Part D questions that are out of 15 rather than out of 12. The general advice from the exam board that is if your spelling is normal for a student your age, you'll get 2 out of 3. If it's particularly good, 3 out of 3. And obviously, if it's lacking a little bit, it'll only get 1. If you don't write enough, or if you write nothing, obviously they can only give you 0 because you need to have written enough in order for them to assess and award you that mark. So we're going to have a look at a question that is, as you can see there, it starts with what we call a controversial statement, a statement that's going to have at least 2 views to it. The Eucharist is the most significant part of the Paschal mystery for Catholics today. It says we need to look at the arguments for and against, as they all do. But in our response, we need to refer to Catholic teachings and then reach a justified conclusion. This indicates that there is some divergence, some variety of Catholic views on this. So here is an answer that I wrote. In purple, I've highlighted some of the kind of literacy skills where I've tried to link these ideas together. Firstly, and perhaps most importantly, the Paschal mystery is made present sacramentally in the Eucharist. Again, using as many technical words and vocabulary as I can, Catholics believe they received the Christ who died, was raised, and is risen in a real and physical way. Additionally, so my second point, linking it to the first, the Eucharistic prayer directly links to the Paschal mystery with the same body and blood broken and poured out and then raised to new life. Finally, participating in the Eucharist is a sign of accepting God's offer of salvation. John's Gospel says God sent his Son so the world might be saved through him. Again, bringing in a source of wisdom and authority. If I've learnt it anyway, it makes sense to bring it in here to make sure I'm really backing up the Catholic view. I've then gone on to the second bit. However, on the other hand, the Paschal mystery is significant in all parts of sacramental life. So again, this is a different Catholic view and not just the Eucharist. For example, the forgiveness of sin made possible through Jesus' death on the cross is seen in the sacrament of reconciliation. Furthermore, salvation is not just about receiving the Eucharist. Actions such as charity work are also important. In Matthew's Gospel, Jesus says, "Whatever you did for one of the least, you did for me." Other Christians who do not celebrate the Eucharist may focus on this. In conclusion, despite the Paschal mystery being significant in other sacraments, the conclusion is the source and summit. As such, it is clear to me, after considering both sides of the argument, that it is the most significant part of the Paschal mystery for Catholics today. So again, in that conclusion, I've picked out what I think is the most important after considering both of those and linked it back to the question. Really, really important if you want to make sure that conclusion is justified and as good and as strong as possible. So that concludes my overview of the exam questions. I hope that's been really, really helpful to you. What I would say to you is before you start trying to perfect your technique, it's really important that you have all the knowledge and understanding in place. So it's really, really vital that you make sure that you've learned your keywords, you've learned your sources of wisdom and authority, you've learned all the key beliefs for the different religious traditions you've looked at, as well as obviously the divergence. If you want a really, really good resource, a really, really useful one, Google the Learning Scientists. They, on their website, have got a fantastic overview of what they have researched as being the 6 most effective ways of revising. Don't just highlight things, don't just reread things. Make sure you keep testing yourself, test your knowledge, test your keywords, test your source of wisdom and authority, and then use the exam questions. As I said, if you are able to purchase the revision guide that I've written, there's about 330 exam questions in there with the answers that if you can complete even a small percentage of those, you will be really, really preparing yourself well for your GCSE exam. I do wish you the very best of luck for your exam. If you work hard, you will do well. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. I really hope this has been useful to you. In the link, I'll provide some information about purchasing the revision guide and access to these slides if they are any use to you. Please do let me know what you think. And as I said, best of luck for your exams. Good luck, work hard, and you will do well.